Hello and welcome to another Game Nexus video. Today we're going to be taking a look at 4 console versions of Double Dragon released in 1988 and 1989. The first one I'm going to be taking a look at is the NES version, which is the one you see right on the screen, released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US in 1988. It was also released in 1994 in Europe. The European versions and the American versions in the US were both released by a company called Trade West. I honestly have no idea why it took so long for them to release the European versions. It could have been a licensing problem or something. But basically, this is what the NES version looks like. The graphics, of course, took a bit of a hit, but I honestly think they're more stylized than anything. I always liked how the graphics of NES games looked. I didn't mind how they had to scale them down for the system, just as long as they didn't make them look horrible like some games I've seen on the system. And now if you notice, that's one thing I never liked about the NES Double Dragon games. Your weapons disappear as soon as the character who you were using them on disappears. For instance, I ended fighting the Lindas there, and their whips are now gone. I can't use them anymore, whereas in the original arcade game, and the Sega Genesis version, I was able to bring a weapon that I used in the beginning of the game anywhere in the game. And you heard that little beep sound just happen. That's another interesting feature about this version. It has this weird heart system. When you have 2 hearts, you can then do the uppercut at the end of your combo. When you gain 3 hearts, you can do a jump kick. And so on. There's more moves when you get 4 hearts and more. And here they just palette swapped the Lindas, and they gave them this fluorescent blue outfit and purple hair, which I think is pretty crazy. If you notice in this game, compared to the Genesis version, the Lindas had their orange hair back, up in that weird style like they did in the arcade version, instead of being the blondes with more of that bowl-type hairdo. And this is something fairly unique to the NES version. Instead of having to fight a Bobo or that weird-looking dude in the jacket when you were doing the barrels, back when that guy threw the barrel at me, you're now doing it on a conveyor belt scene. And here comes a Bobo, the super deformed version, of course. I would like the Abobos in Double Dragon 2 a little bit better because they didn't have these ginormous heads. I guess it's like maybe it could be a Japanese anime thing, more of a chibi or more of a super deformed thing, or maybe they just wanted to make a Bobo look really weird. But either way, I got my 3 hearts now, so I'm just gonna kick this guy right off the cliff here. And that's basically the NES version. So the next is the Sega Master System version. This version was released in 1988 as well. And as you can hear, they have their 8-bit rendition of the Double Dragon theme. And one thing you'll notice right away compared to the NES version is the graphics are a bit better. Stuff just looks better, really. The graphics, then again, are still look a bit stylized. You'll get more of these like SD characters. They're like these little short characters, and not like your full-size characters like the arcade or Genesis version had. But still, I like these kinds of 8-bit graphics, and I always thought they looked pretty cool. Now that's one of those things I always thought was weird, is a double KO in a beat-em-up game. I never had that happen before I played this game. But yeah, this game has nice crisp graphics, but the only thing that I find is that the actual action in the game isn't as fluid as it was in the Nintendo version. It feels a little bit more clunky compared to other versions. And that's something a little unique to this version. The dude was actually sitting on top instead of just walking from the side like in most of the games. And another thing you're going to notice here is the Linda that just came out, she wasn't holding a whip. The whip was actually just sitting in front of the door. And it's very similar to the whip in the NES version. And let's just whip these enemies here. And here comes a Bobo busting out of the wall like he did in the arcade version. That's one thing that was lacking in the NES version as well, I actually didn't mention. And that's one thing I thought was kind of weird here. I got hit, or and then I just hit the Linda there, and the weapon goes flying across the room. I mean, what does it have, a jetpack connected to it or something? Now this dude here, see the one with the pink hair? He made me think of the boss in the original Double Dragon game a lot. Which, it doesn't seem like any of the console versions use the original boss. He's like this, if you recall correctly, he was like this biker dude with a leather jacket and a mohawk, who looked kind of like that dude I just beat up. And here's our barrels again, which you can throw at your enemies. There's this guy, and then a Bobo should pop out. Let's take care of him. And there's your Chibi Abobo. He has his same super deformed big head like he did in the NES version. But still, these Abobos can be quite challenging, just like they were in the other game. The moves in this game just don't really feel as effective as they did in the NES version, whereas I find myself spamming the jump kick very often to get any of the hard enemies done. Well, that was the Sega Master System version. Let's move on to the Atari 7800 version, released in 1989. As you can hear, the music doesn't sound nearly as good as the other two versions, because even though this was considered an 8-bit console, the graphics and the sound didn't look nearly as good as they did in the previous versions. But still, it's a functional version, and the biggest gripe I have with this game as compared to the other ones is the actual controls and the actual fluidity of the movements is even crippled more. You just have a big problem with connecting with any hits and not getting hit by your enemies. They tend to be able to beat you up really quick, and unless you really practice this game a lot or really just get really good at it, you're never really gonna be able to beat these guys. I know there's gotta be like some sort of Atari 7800 Double Dragon Master out there, but honestly, this one just seems like it just wasn't there. The technology just wasn't there for this game, and it just feels stiff, the controls. But I wouldn't doubt, as I had mentioned, if you practice this a lot, you probably could get halfway decent at it. But when you have the versions on the NES, Sega Master System, and the Genesis, there really is no reason to bother with the Atari 7800. Unless you're a really big Atari fan, or if you're really into old school games, or retro games, whichever you want to say. But it doesn't really seem like there's much variety in the enemies. They all look the same with a different color palette. So, that was basically the Atari 7800 version, really only for fans of, really hardcore fans of Double Dragon, or fans of Atari in general. So let's move on to the 2600 version, which I was surprised. So here is the Atari 2600 version, and honestly, considering this is the 2600, this was released in 1989 as well, but honestly, considering this is the 2600, this music really doesn't sound too bad. You just gotta hit the select button. You're defaultly on mission, the first game mode. And of course, here is your character, this tiny little guy who doesn't have much detail, and all the enemies in the game appear to be exactly the same. They're like these same enemies who do the same moves, who have the same model with, just like in the Atari 7800 version, they're just palette swapped. The biggest problem with this game, just like the 7800 version, and even more so here, is the controls. They're really just crippled. The problem is you have one joystick and one button. If you press the button while pressing left or right, you will punch in either direction. If you press diagonally down in the direction you're walking, and the button, you'll do a regular kick. If you press up and the button, you'll do a jump kick. Now, in theory, this sounds like it would work, but it really just doesn't work here, and this is just another one where I honestly say, this is really just for the fans of Atari and the fans of Double Dragon, really, really hardcore ones, because this really isn't a good game. So I recommend the NES version above all these versions, honestly.